So jazz tunes, jazz standards, or tunes in general. As a bass player, we probably just want to learn the bass line, right? Well, I think you're wrong there. If the tune has a melody, which most ones do, to be frank, I think the bass player should learn the melody. Not in essence to play the melody over the tune, but to understand the melody and how it works over the chords, as you can become a much better soloist and walk better over those tunes as well. This is more specific to jazz tunes and jazz standards, but you can apply this to any tune in any genre. Learn the melodies and apply them over the chord changes. Works great for pop and, you know, anything similar to that sort of genre as well, but we're mainly focusing on jazz here today. So the tune we've got is Minority, and this is a great one with some great changes and also a great melody as well. I really like how simple the melody is, but how effective it works over the chord changes. So here's a little sample of that melody here. So as you can see on the chart that I've got here, the melody is obviously written out, but so are the chord changes. As a bass player, I'll mainly be focusing on those chord changes, but often I learn the melody first before I learn the chord changes, and there is a good reason for this. Learning the melody can improve your bass solos, and you might say, why or how? Quoting the melody often in a bass solo is often a great thing to do, especially in jazz. If you're playing with people are like, oh yeah, they know the melody. It's a thing that a lot of bass players don't do, and when you do learn the melody, it can spark things up in people's ear, and it also gives you ideas for a solo. If you're ever stuck for ideas, just quote the melody. You can often start solos quoting a melody as well. It's a great starting point for the solo, and it's great to quote any melody, especially the melody of the tune, in a bass solo, as it's usually the instrument which is associated with the melody least, and suddenly you start playing the melody at points and it's like, oh yeah, no, this bass player's really got it down, and people are like, yeah, this just sounds great, because they've already given you essentially a perfect formula, a perfect solo if you will, albeit a written solo, over the chord changes. Now I'm not suggesting you just play the whole melody over a solo, but you can, and that works great as well. It's sort of more of a soli rather than a solo, but that's great too. But still, it gives you a building block for a solo, which I think a lot of people struggle with. And while chord tones and chord changes and those changes are the main functions for my solos, and especially on a tune like this with very interesting chords that I can navigate around, there's a lot for me to do, but I will still quote the melody, and I still learnt the melody of this tune when I learnt this tune, because it's a good thing. And as a horn player as well, I'm learning a lot of melodies, but I do want to keep that up on bass too, as I want to learn all of the chord changes and associate the chord changes with the melodies. As actually, once you've learnt the melody, you can sort of learn the chord changes really easily, as you can figure out how things fit over the chord changes. There's a few odd chords in this, like the first one, which is a minor major 7, but it sort of makes sense over the chord changes of what you're given. So, you know, it's fine. There's a few things which are a little bit odd though, and you've just got to keep your ears out for it. But most of it you can pretty much work out just without even looking at the chord changes. You can work out the chord changes from the melody essentially. It's so important to learn the melody and apply them to the chord changes, because those chord changes now really have meaning and have direction, and you can see how the melody arcs over the chord changes and walk better over it. If you keep an eye on how the melody goes up and it goes down and how it moves around the key, then you can structure your bass lines in that way, and also go up when the melody goes up and go down when the melody goes down. And while you don't really need to learn the melody to get that out, you can just have a good ear for it. It's still good if you know the melody, and you can quote notes of the melody while you're walking as well, and it fits over the chord changes great. And I think that is a great thing to do as well. There's so much good for learning a melody, especially in a jazz standard, because it gives you ideas for a solo, and it can improve your walking in ways that you wouldn't really imagine to start with. So have you ever had that moment where you've needed to take a bass solo and you have no idea how to begin it, and then once you're getting to the end of your bass solo, you have no idea how to end it, and then also you sort of have no idea of what you're supposed to do in the middle as well? Well, essentially, once you've learned what notes you need to be playing in a bass solo, once you've learned your chord tones essentially, if you don't, go watch the video I've got over there. They're probably over there, to be honest. So once you've learned your chord tones, this is the video that I want for you. Even if you haven't learned the chord tones though, it's still a useful one. And it's how you're supposed to structure a bass solo. So let's get into it. Now, you want to start with something that is sort of big and melodic. I'd say play off the melody. It's great if you know the melody to the tune that you're playing. If you're doing a bass solo, and simply quote the melody perhaps at the beginning as well, and that really works effectively. Essentially, you want something that's melodic and works well, very well within the chord changes, or is either quite grand and quite complex in a way you can do as well. But often starting simple is good. For bebop, you might want to start something that's perhaps a little bit more complex and all over the place. But you know, you can always start simple, and starting simple is often the best. If you start with a nice melodic rhythmic idea, it's often a great way of starting off a bass solo. Then when you get into the middle, there's not really too much apart from sort of follow the chord changes and, you know, play along with the chord changes. But one thing which I think is very, very important in this middle section is driving the music on in some sense, because you are the bass player, so it's sort of supposed to be the meat and potatoes, I guess, to the music you want to say. And if you can sort of drive the piece on a bit, you don't have to, but if you can drive it on with your solo as well, and perhaps not have too much space in a bass solo. Space is great for any solo, but usually if I'm soloing on bass compared to on a horn, I'll try and leave a little bit less space, and it's usually because it's a little bit more open. But space is always welcome. I just don't tend to leave really big and long gaps. It's partly how you want to play it as well. If you want to leave long gaps, but I'd say fill it with a lot of material, but make sure it's good material. And another way of doing that is developing good ideas in this section of the solo, essentially. So if you find an idea which sounds great, then play it again, and then play it again, and play it again. And this might be over different chord changes, so you need to move it around the neck, transpose it, whatever, or you can just do stuff chromatically as well, or just do the exact same thing again if you notice that it works over the same chord as the next bar, or if you know it's got the exact same chord on the next bar as the bar you're playing. Developing those rhythmic ideas and melodic ideas works key in this part of a solo, I think, where you can start melodically and simply, and often it's great to start melodically for a bass solo, and that's how I think I usually like to structure the bass solos. If I don't know the melody though at the beginning, always start with some good chord tones as well, but in that middle section, developing some rhythmic ideas and going through and playing over the chord changes and sort of driving the piece on are my main factors in that midsection of a bass solo and how I want to structure it. I won't leave too much space, but you definitely can. I'll play less melodically than I did at the beginning. I want the beginning to be a bit simpler. Let's say I get into it a little bit more in these midsections. I prefer the beginning to be a lot more melodic and simple, whereas you'll get a lot of like sort of quicker chord tone based stuff, at least in the midsections of my bass solos. At least that's how I like to do them. But then it does come time to end a bass solo. Now, by the time you're getting to end a bass solo, you've got to think to yourself, you want to sort of end as you would at the start, like what you did at the start. It's sort of like, you know, when you get a book that just closes itself up right at the last moment, links itself back to the beginning even. That is a great thing you can do. Or go back to the melody again. Often if you start with the melody and end with the melody, it's great. And this is actually a tip which I think you should really listen to. It's probably the top tip of the video. If you're playing with people that you haven't played before on a gig or something like that, often if you play the melody at the end of your solo, it signals, hey, that's the end of my solo, and you don't even need to say anything. And often it's like, oh yeah, the bass solo is now ended. Especially if you do it right at the end of the form, in like the last 4 bars, last 2 bars of the form or something, and then you quote the melody right at the end, it's like, okay, yeah, the bass solo is ended. If you do it right in the middle of the form, it's not going to be like, okay, the bass solo is ended there. But if you do it right at the end, often quoting the melody at the end marks a great finish and works melodically as well, and people generally like if you finish with a melody. You don't have to, and I can't say I always finish going back to the melody, but if I know the melody of the tune, which most of the times I do, especially if it's tunes that I'm playing with my jazz trio. On some other occasions when I'm at other playing things, I don't know all the tunes because other people are calling the tunes and I've just got to play the changes, then I don't know the melodies there, but I'll try and pick it up by ear as well. If you've got a good ear for these things, listen to the melody as well, and you can even quote it in your solos even if you don't know the melody, or you can work it out from the chord changes and, you know, use your ear for some judgment as well. That's a great thing you can do, although perhaps a little more advanced. If you're more on the basic side of things, you don't have to do any of that. But if you think, start melodically, then have your develop rhythmic ideas and perhaps be less melodic in the middle. You can be melodic all throughout really, but generally you're less melodic in the middle and you drive it on a little bit more and you develop those rhythmic ideas. And it could be anything. It could be any basic scale idea or anything, and you'll see that in my solo example, which I'm going to give in a bit, and then end melodically or even end with the melody in a best case scenario for sort of a air quotes perfect bass solo. But you don't have to do this every time. It's just a great three sort of part way of structuring a bass solo, which will work every time. It's always good to vary things, and when you don't know the melody, then you can just play melodically around the chord changes. Of course, it's great to know the chord changes or have the chord changes in front of you when you're doing the bass solo. You usually do, especially if you're playing somewhere, but if you already know the tunes, then it's great. You already have a lot more of a higher ground. And if this is your first time, do it with a tune you know and you already know the melody of, and you'll find it a lot easier to start developing those ideas and get a good sounding bass solo. But as always, it all takes practice. You've got to know your chord tones. I'll leave that video up again. If I haven't already linked it, it'll be there or there, depending on which way this camera goes near the end of the video. And that's all I've got, but I'm going to show you a playing example of my solo, and you know, it will sort of sum up everything I've said in this video into one neat solo. See if you can guess the jazz standard. Put it in the comments as well, because I'm not going to tell you. But yeah, that's it for the video. Hope you enjoyed the bass solo and now feel more energized, and you feel like you've got a structure for your next bass solo, and you feel like, okay, I sort of know what I'm going to be doing for the next one. As at the start, it can just feel like, oh my god, there's so much, what do I do? So I hope this has cleared it up with the structure. Again, if you don't know your chord tone, learn your chord tones. I'll probably put it in the description, but otherwise just go to one of the cards in the video and you'll see the chord tones video there, as it is very, very useful in my opinion. And that's it for today. Thanks for 100 subscribers, because it has been nice to reach that milestone. I'll see you all in the next video. Bye.